I've spent 11 months knitting from my stash, and this is only half of what I've made, so we have a lot to catch up on.
Hi everyone, my name is Katrina Walser from Oliphant, and I'm a knitting tech editor, teacher and designer based in Sydney in Australia. And welcome back to my channel. Now, the big thing that I'm here to chat to you about today is that for the last 11 months, I have only knit from my stash, which I'm very proud of, but it was also a bit of an accidental stash down, which I will explain about later. So if you're new here and you only clicked on the video because it says stash down, I do appreciate you very much because I'm in the same boat actually. I've been watching so many stash down videos recently. I think because I'm doing it myself, it's something I'm really interested in. And so this is going to be part 1 of 2 videos where I just walk through all of the projects that I've knit. And then in the second video, I will walk through some tips and tricks I have for you if you also want to stash down, and also some things that I've learned along the way. So if that's something that you're interested in as well, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can be updated when that video comes out too. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate you. And I know it's been a really long time, so if I just showed back up in your subscriptions or if I showed up in your recommended list, then however you got back here, thank you so much for coming back. And thank you so much to everyone who reached out while I was on my YouTube and Instagram break. I do really appreciate you all checking in and seeing how I am. And because of that, this video is going to serve as both a project update and a life update. So I'm going to explain what I was doing while I was knitting the projects, and hopefully that'll keep you up to date with where I'm at so that as we go forward with the podcast, things will make a bit more sense. And please, if you could do me a favor, if you could hit the like button. I'm a little bit worried that no one's going to see this because I don't know what happens when you go on a long YouTube break, whether no one gets to see it at all or if YouTube decides to give you a boost to try and help you out. But either way, I think if people hit like, if you do like this video, then it'll help me reach more people and actually get some views, which would be very helpful. Okay, so let's just get into it. So first off, I think the first thing to explain is how I started my stash down. So I was very busy at the end of last year because I had a baby in late October. And fair warning, a lot of what's about to be explained or what I'm about to talk about happens in a hospital. So if you don't want to hear anything medical, I recommend skipping forward to this timestamp here because my life sort of got out of the hospital in January or so. And so I shouldn't have too many medical references after that. So while I was busy with the baby, I didn't really have time to go yarn shopping, surprisingly enough. And by the end of December, I realized that I had only knit from my stash. And my stash has been stressing me out, so I figured that it was worth keeping on going. So I told myself that I was going to keep 2024 as a complete stash down year and only knit out of stash. Now, I'm quite hardline when it comes to goals because I know if I slip a little bit, I'll slip a lot. So I've literally only bought one skein all year. And that was just because I was on holiday and I wanted a souvenir skein. It was a really special holiday. And so I thought it was worth remembering by buying some yarn. I've also let a couple of other balls into my stash, but I will talk about those later. And I didn't buy them. They were gifted to me. So for quick stats, I have knit 21 projects in the last 11 months. And I've used up 7,314 meters of yarn. Not skeins of yarn. Oh my gosh, that would be so much. Meters of yarn. And 6,500 of those came out of stash. The rest were from a project where the yarn was gifted to me. All right. So to begin with, the very first project I have to show you are these socks. And these are called my hospital socks because I cast them on while I was in labor. So if you've been around for a while, there's a reason that you've never seen socks really on the channel before. It's because I'm very much not a sock knitter. I'm like adamantly not a sock knitter. So blame it on pregnancy hormones maybe, but I decided I wanted to have a cozy pair of socks while I was in the hospital. And because I am who I am, I procrastinated for so long that I cast them on while I was giving birth. So this is going to sound really strange if you haven't had a child before, but there's a lot of the labour process, especially in the early stages, where you're just sitting around waiting to chat to a doctor. Well, at least in the ways that my labours have played out. So I just cast on my socks, and I got a lot of comments from the nurses. I think they were quite tickled that this was something I was doing. And I discovered that you can in fact knit with a cannula in your wrist. It's not the most pleasant thing to do, but it is possible. So these are the toe-up socks with a Flegel heel by Nitro Knitters, and the yarn is Multicoloured Sock from Bendigo Woolen Mills. Given that they were my first pair of socks that I've knit for a long time, I had a lot of trouble with the fit, which is part of why I don't knit socks, because I've always had trouble with the fit. So I kept undoing them and redoing them, and still the foot is a little bit too big and too short. So I did manage to stretch it out a little bit as I was blocking it, and that did help it a bit. But this is a 64 stitch sock, and it's still too big. So I made some adjustments for the next pair of socks that I made, but I will talk about those later. The main other gripe that I have with this is that the Bendigo Woolen Mills multicolored sock, which was gifted to me by a friend, thank you so much, Mel, it's one long gradient, which I find really strange for sock yarn, because it means that you get two socks that are more like fraternal twins than identical ones. So this one's very purple, this one's a lot more pink, and so they don't really match, but I wear them anyway because they're cozy. And I'm going to put them on now because my feet are cold. Okay, the next project I have is the No Fuss Cable Beanie, which is a pattern of mine. And this was knit in the adult male size, which I think is a size E in the pattern. And it was knit from We Are Knitters Petite Wool. Now, I haven't knit with this yarn in a really long time, and I used to say that it was my favourite yarn, and I wouldn't say that anymore, I don't think. So it was interesting going back to a yarn that I have a lot of that I haven't used for ages, because it's interesting to see how your tastes change as time goes on. But it's still really cozy and really lovely to wear. And so this was for charity, and I've knit 2 or 3 of these now since I knit this one. So I've got these 2, and I have one that I gifted to my dad. And they were all made out of the We Are Knitters Petite Wool. Also, if you are interested in supporting the channel, the best way to do that actually is to buy a pattern. So if this is something that you're interested in, or if any of my other patterns, if you want to check them out, I will leave a link to my Ravelry page down below. And if Ravelry is not accessible to you, let me know and I will figure out another way for you to take a look through my pattern catalogue. But yes, so these are going to go to a charity called Mission for Seafarers, who are a charity that actually looks after people who go on shipping containers. Because apparently people who man like the ships that get all of the stuff that we buy from overseas get really cold. And I'll put a link to the details where you can find their mailing address and their needs if you also would like to knit for a charity. Now the next project is a gift, which I no longer have, so I will put lots of footage up on the screen for you. It was called the Jaspy Shawl. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it was designed by Kika Gulen, which again I'm also probably not pronouncing right. The Jaspy Shawl is a shawl. I made it more of a scarf because I didn't want it to be a very wide project. So it was for a gift for my daughter's music teacher. So she went to the same music class for 2 years, and then she was going to age out of it. And I was always knitting in Amelia's music classes, and her teacher was always really interested in what I was making, and she would comment on it. So I figured it'd be nice to give her a gift. And she was this fabulous European, I think Italian lady, and she always wore these like lovely sophisticated outfits. And so I thought it'd be nice to use this sock blank that I was gifted from Erica from By Corolla Down Under. So if you've never seen a sock blank before, it's a piece of yarn that's been machine knit into basically a rectangle, and then the dyer can the dyer can dye it as a rectangle. I know, especially in Erica's case, the way she did it is that she laid plants and leaves directly onto the rectangle, and I think she must have dyed it flat somehow. And so when you looked at the sock blank, it was so gorgeous. There were like leaf outlines and prints in the sock blank. But the problem is that I've never knit from a sock blank before, and I didn't really know how to use it. Erica did give me directions, but the thing that I had trouble with is that the first step of using the blank is to unwind the yarn. And the way I did that was that I wound it onto my Swift, and then I had a big loop of yarn, which is essentially what a skein looks like, and I tied it up in a couple of places, gave it a bath, I hung it up to dry, and I weighed it down a little bit to try and make the skein stretch out, and then I rewound it in the way that you would normally wind a skein. And the problem is that when I put it onto my Swift, it was not even. So there were parts of it that were around the Swift really tight and other parts that were quite loose. And in retrospect, it should have been obvious that would be a problem, but at the time, it didn't really occur to me that I'd have issues with it later. But it meant that when I washed and dried it, parts of it were sort of adequately stretched out, but other parts were still sort of crinkly in that way that you get like yarn ramen after you unwind stockinette. And so it just meant that the tension when I actually knit it up was really uneven. So I'll try and put a picture up here of what I'm talking about, but you can see in the stockinette sections that there are parts that are just really uneven. But I think it turned out okay in the end. I don't have any great photos of it because I made it very last minute and I didn't get time to take a lot of nice photos of it, but I'll put up what I have for you. And the final product was quite beautiful. The sock blank knit up wonderfully, and it was such a beautiful yarn to work with. I just wish that I had treated it better myself. But her teacher really loved it, and she put it on straight away, so hopefully she's enjoying it still. Alright, after that, what I have are 2 Santa hats. So, my son was born in October, and he had a lot of health issues, which were not a surprise. We knew that they were going to be present when he was born. And it did mean that we ended up in and out of the hospital. And then, in early December, we had to go in for his surgery. So he had a planned surgery, but it was planned in the way that they knew it was necessary, but they didn't know exactly when it was going to happen. So it ended up happening in mid-December. Thankfully, we were out in time for Christmas. But it did mean that I knew he needed a Santa hat because I knit a set of Santa hats for myself and my daughter and my husband years and years ago. So these were the original hats. The pattern is called Festive Mood, and it is by Julie Hart. And so it's a fisherman's brim and then just a regular stockinette top. And I was going to go out and buy yarn, and then I didn't have time, and I was like, well, let's see what I can find in my stash. And so I found this yarn here, which is not an exact color match, but it's pretty close. And so this is made from Cleckheaton Country, which is this yarn right here, and Heirloom Alpaca 8-ply, which is nice and squishy. And those became the colors for this hat. And so I made the small size in the DK weight, and it was so cute. Oh my gosh. Part of what happened with my son is that he was very small when he was born, and so he, like, I kid you not, he looked like a garden gnome. I'm truly trying really hard not to put pictures of my kids' faces on the internet at the moment, but I will put this picture up because you can hardly see his face. But honestly, he looked like a garden gnome in his little hat. And then while I was in the hospital, the nurses, the picture that I showed you with the big Christmas tree is actually from the hospital, and it's so done up with a little chair because the nurses went a little nuts when they saw him in his hat and decided he needed to do a photo shoot. So they set the little chair up for him. But they said that they'd been meaning for a while to set that chair up so people could pose with the tree. And so after I finished this one, I figured I would make a second one for them and they could use it as a prop if they wanted it in their little photo shoot photos. So I didn't love the fisherman's rib, and I know enough about brioche to know that I could just sub in the brioche instead of using fisherman's rib for the brim. So I did regular 2-color brioche for the bottom of this hat, and the reason that it's 2 colors is that I only had a little bit of the alpaca left while I was in the hospital, and I didn't have time to go home and get more, so I just made it 2 colors instead because I had lots of the red left. So these are my 2 Santa hats. I didn't quite finish this before we got discharged, which is why I still have it, but I think I'm going to mail it off to them probably soon, so they have it, and hopefully they can use it for photo shoots and things. After all of those projects that I showed you, it was the end of December and I had only knit from stash, so I figured I may as well keep it going. So I made it official in my own head, that I would only knit from stash in 2024, and that's what I've done, and we'll go over the rest of those projects now. So the next project I have was another gift. It doesn't actually have a pattern. I guess the closest pattern that I know of that you can look up is called the Bee Blanket from We Are Knitters, and it's a honeycomb stitch that I've been aware of for a really long time. Quite a few different people use it. I know it also shows up in the Stephen West patterns a lot, and it's pretty straightforward. It's slip stitch knitting, which means that you only use 1 color of yarn at a time, which is really nice because it's just a lot easier to knit with. So this is knit from 4 Season Flinders, which is a 8-ply 100% cotton. If you're overseas, 8-ply is DK. And I don't remember when I bought this, and I had bought it with the intention of making this baby blanket because I had quite a few friends who had babies almost at the same time as I did. So this blanket went to my friend Helen, who is also a knitter and crocheter, so I feel like it's always nice gifting it to people who appreciate it. And I don't have the blanket now, it's with her son, but it was knit from a palette of 2 greens and a yellow and a grey, as well as the cream colour going over the top. And she really likes it. I'm pretty sure I've seen her son using it, and yeah, it's pretty straightforward. If you want more details about how the pattern worked, then there's a link. There's lots of details in the Ravelry project, which I'll link all the Ravelry projects down below as well. Alright, the next pattern that I have is one last beanie that I'm going to send off to Mission to Seafarers, and I wanted to mix it up a little bit, so I didn't use my No Fuss cable beanie pattern this time around. This is a pattern called Man Hat. Very descriptive. It's by Haven Ashley, and it was pretty straightforward. It's a broken rib or a mistake rib. Maybe it's just regular ribbing. Let's see. Oh, I have no idea what the stitch pattern is. Anyway, you should go check it out because I'm pretty sure it's a free pattern. But the thing you should know is that if a pattern ever tells you that you should knit a project on a needle that is 3 times smaller than the size you normally use with that yarn, you should probably ignore it. Because I did that and this is so dense. It's such a dense material. It really shouldn't be like this, I don't think. And this is meant to be a male medium or a male large, and it barely fits me. I'm not going to put it on because of my ponytail, but it just fits me. So hopefully they'll find someone who can use it, and maybe if it's chilly on the water, someone will appreciate having a very dense beanie, but I'm probably going to knit another one of these, and I will definitely use my regular needle size. So I normally knit the We Are Knitters petite yarn on a 6 or a 6.5 millimeter needle, and I knit this on a 5, which is a US 8, with bulky yarn. Just like, no, too much. So I'm going to try this again at some point, but I'm going to size up my needle. Alright, the next things that I knit were also gifts, so I haven't got them anymore, but they were a set. One was a headband and the other one was a pair of wrist warmers, and they were for my daughter's favourite teacher at her daycare. So part of what has been sort of intense over the last year is that aside from my son being born, my daughter also started kindergarten, which I think just starting school is one thing, but between all of the hospital visits and the fact that she was graduating out of she was graduating out of daycare, and she was graduating from her music class. There was end of year concerts and graduations and a lot of emotional stuff happening there, and orientation day for her school starting. And all of those things were happening right while my husband and I were going in and out of hospital with my son. So it was a really intense period at the end of the year. And again, it means that I knit these very late. I ended up having to give them to her teacher a couple of months after she actually left daycare. Well, my daughter left daycare, not the teacher. Because I just didn't have time, honestly. Because bringing a kid home from the hospital means that even though that's out of the way, and he was much better, like he was fine. As soon as the surgery was done and he had recovered, he was totally fine. Pretty normal baby from then on. But there were still a lot of doctor visits, and also just settling back into life with a baby at home while your big kid is starting school. Yes. It was a lot. Sorry, bit of a tangent. But these two projects don't have a lot of pictures, and I made them in a rush. But the mittens were a pattern called Mossy Mitts, and it's a pattern that I wrote for Knit Crate a couple of years ago. They've since gone out of business, but the pattern's still available on my Ravelry page. And I don't have the actual pair that I made, but this was the sample that I made for Knit Crate back in the day. So there's some fingerless mitts, and they have this cool slip stitch pattern as the main hand part. And the yarn was called Malabrigo dos Tierras, which is this gorgeous sort of mix of wool and alpaca. And so I made a set for Amelia's teacher that consisted of mitts and a headband that I just sort of made up as I went. It was made from the same yarn, and I reused the main stitch pattern from the hand as the main part of the headband. So, like this, just extrapolate down. Now, the next project that I made is actually one of the ones that I am most grateful to the stashdown aspect of this whole year for, because I never would have knit this using this yarn if I hadn't been forced to. So this is called the Domino Baby Blanket by Sylvia Roseboom. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that properly, but I'll pop it up here on the screen. And it is a mitered square blanket where you change colour halfway through the square. So again, I have gifted this already, so I don't have it here, but I'll pop up as many pictures as I can. And I knit this from Pearl Soho Cattail Silk. Yes. Made a baby blanket out of silk. Bougiest baby blanket ever. This is one very fancy baby. But it is machine washable, and the label says that you could dry it too, but I washed and dried a test square that I used as a swatch just to see what would actually happen. And it washed fine, but it did not really survive the dryer very well. Like, it was fine, but it just shrank quite a bit. And I didn't want the blanket to shrink that small. So I have warned my friend that she can put it in the washing machine, but she probably shouldn't dry it. So I have a lot of Pearl Soho yarn in my stash because I used to design for them. And when you design for Pearl Soho, they will happily gift you yarn if you need some to do little swatches. So when you want to pitch a design to a yarn company, you have to make essentially a swatch just to show partially what your design is going to look like in that yarn. And so Pearl Soho have always been quite generous with sending yarn to you if you need it for the swatches. So I just had this yarn sitting in my stash because I needed just a tiny bit for the swatch that I wanted to show them. And I had almost 2 full skeins, one of the pink and one of the white. And yeah, I just had no idea what to do with it. I didn't love using it initially. It just felt a little rough on my hands. And I was struggling to figure out what I would actually use it for. And so I'd sort of forgotten that I had it, really. It's been sitting in my stash for a couple of years. And so I never would have used this for a baby blanket if I wasn't forced to, or if I wasn't intentionally stashing down. And so I'm really glad that I had to, because it turned out wonderfully. It's so pretty, and it's actually really soft. I don't know why in the ball it feels a little rough, and when you start knitting with it, it takes a sec to get used to because it feels a little more rustic. But then once you get used to it and you get in a bit of a roll, it was actually a really fun project to do, especially because you knit the squares one at a time and you join them as you go. And so it's probably one of the first modular patterns that I've done, and it was just really satisfying watching it grow out from this little square that you start with. So she really likes it. She sent me pictures of her baby using it, and yeah, she had to wash it the other day, which I know because she asked me for the washing instructions, which means she has actually been using it. And it's just this beautiful, I've been calling it my strawberries and cream blanket. It's just this beautiful white and pink sort of pastel-y looking baby blanket. Okay, the next project I have is the one that wasn't knit from stash. So this was my Easter show shawl for the year. I have, for the last 2 years, entered the Sydney Royal Easter Show in the knitting competition. And if you're not from Sydney, the Easter Show is a big agricultural show. I think the closest thing that they have in the States is a state fair. And they have a big craft competition every year. And so I knit the bubble wrap shawl, which is a shawl that I tech edited for Leela Franco. And she makes these beautiful brioche creations. They are a challenge to edit. I have loved learning how to edit brioche. It's definitely taught me a lot about how to read and edit knitting patterns. And I'm just in awe of the things that Leela comes up with because they're so beautiful and so intricate. And I edited this for her maybe in the middle of last year, and I knew pretty quickly that I wanted to knit it. So I decided to make it for the Easter show. And I got in touch with Alicia from Natural Yarn Co. because she's a dyer who I've seen at a lot of our local yarn shows. And I reached out and asked her if she would like the shawl as a sample for her shop or for her market stalls. And so she gifted me the yarn. And it's her sock yarn base. So the pink was called Pig Face, and the sort of rainbowy, multicolored white was called MacArthur. So this is the MacArthur here. It's this gorgeous pastel-y, pinky, bluey, purple colour. Hopefully the light's showing that up nicely. And I have quite a lot of it left because it only used a little bit of the second skein for the shawl. And so, yeah, that was my entry for the Easter show this year. I didn't place, unlike last year, but I'm really glad to have made the shawl. I, once again, procrastinated quite a lot, and I ended up having to knit for about 3 days straight before the show entries were due in. All props to my husband, who looked after both children for most of those 3 days while I knit my fingers off. But I got it done, and the shawl is beautiful, and it lives with Alicia now. Okay, the next project I have is a crochet project, and this is called the Zora Bralette by Lucia Consec. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this because this is made from the same yarn as the top that I'm wearing. But it's made from Bendigo Woolen Mills 10-ply cotton. And it has these cute little pink flower buttons, which I also got from my stash. And so I made this because it started showing up in a lot of lists of recommended summer projects, and it was right around the autumn here. So I think people were gearing up for the American summer, which is why it started showing up in a lot of people's to make lists. And it is very cute. I am not going to pose in this for you, but I'll show you what it looks like with the sort of product picture over here. I am admittedly not very well endowed, and so this actually fits really well, this style of bralette, but I did make the straps a little bit too long, so they tend to slide off a little bit. I do have ideas for how to fix it. I think mostly what I need to do is undo the strap right here where it joins with the waist, with the waist strap, and just move it down. So right now it's attached at the top of the waistband, and I think I just need to move it down so it's attached at the bottom of the waistband, and that should tighten it up for me a little bit, and maybe that will mean it won't drop down quite as much. But it's really cute and very wearable, so I'm really glad I made this actually. It was a bit of a new kind of project for me because I don't crochet a lot, or at least I haven't recently, and it was a stitch that I was unfamiliar with and a construction that I was unfamiliar with, and it is actually custom sized. So I think I must have measured wrong because my straps are too long, but if you're interested in a pattern that you can completely customize for your own body, then it's a great one to try out. Okay, after the Zora bralette, I made a cardigan for Jonathan. Oh yes, I haven't mentioned that yet. His name's Jonathan. And this was made from the scraps of the baby blanket that I had made for my friend Helen. So, Jonathan was one of those babies that drooled constantly, which my daughter Amelia was not, so it was not something we were prepared for. And he started doing this right in the autumn as it was turning into winter, and so we just did not have enough jumpers for him because he would just soak through them very quickly. So I decided that making a cotton jumper would be a good idea because then we could wash it really easily. And so I found a free pattern from Drops, which Drops patterns are always interesting. If you're unfamiliar with Drops Design, they're a company that make a lot of really standard European yarns, but they have a giant pattern repository, and some of them are not the clearest. So it can be a bit of a dice roll with how easy or difficult it is to follow the pattern. So this one wasn't so bad. It was called the Sweet Gleam cardigan, and I liked it for this yarn, mostly because I knew I only had little bits of each of the greens and the yellow left, and it worked really nicely because it had these different textured sections in the yoke, so it made it really easy to have different colours because I could just change the colour with the texture. The yellow and the grey stripe down here are actually the same texture. I just broke it up when the yellow ran out and added in an extra row of the garter stitch to make it look like it was intentionally different sections, but in the pattern it's just one long section. Now, I didn't love this project for a couple of different reasons. The cotton was good to use for the blanket, but I just didn't love using it for a garment. I don't really know why. It just wasn't my favourite. And I also thought that I had more of the grey than I thought I did. And so when the grey ran out, it was really short. So if you look at where that grey ends, if I had started the ribbing like here, it would have just made for a very, very short cardigan, especially compared to how big it is around. So I had to add in a little bit of the white, which I still had left over. And so I don't love this random stripe of white down the bottom. And I also wasn't paying attention with the button band. So the buttons are not at all evenly spaced. I just threw in buttonholes when I remembered. And so I think this was probably a reflection of my state of mind at the time. I just wasn't really feeling it knitting wise. he was probably 3 or 4 months old, maybe a little bit older, and we were still trying to settle back into life with a newborn in the house. And there was just a lot going on that wasn't knitting. And I sort of lost my knitting mojo a little bit, to be honest. And so this really didn't help, because making something that you aren't loving while your mojo is sort of low isn't the best idea. And so it's okay. It's just like his ugly little jumper. Especially as well because I went stash diving for buttons, and these were the only buttons that I had enough of that actually fit in the buttonholes. And even the buttons are just sort of ugly. That's an easy thing to fix, I guess. I could just buy some new buttons that aren't quite so weird and plastic and rectangular. And weirdly enough, I've gotten a lot of comments on this while we're out from people saying that they really like it. But I assume that they're just responding to the fact that he's wearing something hand knit and not on the garment itself. But maybe I'm still just being too hard on myself. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think about his funny little cardigan. But he has gotten a lot of use out of it, and it is way too big for him, which I did intentionally. I always make my baby's knits a size bigger. So hopefully he'll fit into it a bit better next year, and he can get another winter's use out of it. So the next project I have is one that I am actually really proud of. So this beautiful thing is called Sorrel, and it's a pattern by Woolen Pine. And I made one of these for my daughter, maybe in the middle of last year. And I had bought this yarn with the intent of making a matching jumper for me. So this is knit from Birdhouse Fibers Silky Sock, which is a merino and silk blend. And it's hand dyed here in New South Wales. And the colour was called Whitewater. And I'm a sucker for anything with silk in it, so this is just the most gorgeous material. It's squishy and a little bit shiny, and the colour's beautiful. And I will try and insert pictures of me actually wearing it, so you can see what it looks like on. Now, this is one of those things that I did that is more inspired by the pattern than actually following it. Which, if you've been here for a while, you'll know that's a trend. As a designer, I can't help tinkering with other people's patterns, and so I hardly ever knit anything to pattern. And in this case, what happened is that the kids' version of this pattern is knit in 4-ply, which is fingering weight for my American friends. And so I just assumed that the adult version would be too. And then I went to buy the pattern, and there are a couple of different versions of Sorrel. So there's the original version, which is knit from a 4-ply held double with a mohair, which gives you a thicker, sort of warmer material. And then there's something called Summer Sorrel, which is actually a t-shirt. And that's knit in 4-ply, and I knew that, and so I assumed that I was going to make a Summer Sorrel. But then I went and looked at it, and the gauge is quite loose. It's very airy, because it's meant to be a t-shirt, so I think they intentionally did that to make it more breathable in the summer. But I didn't want that either, because I wanted a fallish, autumny winter jumper. So what I ended up doing was I bought the original pattern, but I didn't hold it double with the mohair, and I did a bunch of maths to figure out how to make it work for the 4-ply yarn. So I knit the dimensions of a size 3, but I used the size 7 instructions because my gauge was so different to what it said in the pattern, which meant I had to do a lot of maths to adjust not just the stitch gauge, but also the row gauge, because my row gauge was also very, very off. So I had to do a lot of maths around these dip stitches to make sure that the yoke actually came to the right depth. And then the other thing as well that I found is that I normally need 3 skeins of yarn to make a jumper or a cardigan. That's my normal sweater quantity. So if I'm buying yarn for a jumper, I just by default buy 3. And I was working on this, and I got to the body, and I realized that there was no way this was going to fit with 3 skeins of yarn. So I had initially imagined that this would be a long full-sized jumper, and I had to make it very, very cropped because I was going to buy an extra skein of yarn, but I went and looked on their website and they don't make this yarn in this color anymore. And I didn't really want to bother her, asking her to custom dye me an extra skein. And so I took a look at it and I realized that I did actually want a crop jumper. I don't have any cropped lightweight jumpers in my wardrobe. I only have really thick ones. And I figured it'd be nice, given how many high-waisted shorts, especially, that I own, to have a lighter weight jumper that I can wear in the spring or even on like a chilly summer day. And so I made it very cropped and it's worked out quite nicely, actually. The length is just right to wear with my high-waisted shorts. So the next project I have is a teeny tiny beanie that I knit while I was in the middle of my sorrel trying to figure out what to do with the fact that I only had 3 skeins. This only took a night, and it was very much inspired by my friend Ira, who is Cookie Knits here on YouTube. I'll pop a link to her podcast down below. But she had made a little bear hat for a friend's baby, so I decided to do the same. And I just made up the pattern. It was pretty simple. All I did was I used the recommended needle size and the gauge on the ball band for the yarn, which was, once again, this heirloom alpaca that I had used previously for his hats. And I cast on at the top using Judy's Magic cast on so that it made a closed top right here. And then I just knit in the round straight down and added the ribbing at the bottom, and you've got a beanie. It's based on the pussy hats that were used for like political protests back in the day. It's a really simple pattern. And then I just put the pom-poms on the ends. And he looks so cute in it, but he's a typical baby and he rips it off after about 5 seconds of wearing it. So maybe I can try sneaking it back on his head here and there, but I don't know how much use he's going to get out of it. But I did get some pretty cute photos after I made it. So that was good at least. Okay, the next project is another gift that I have given away, but this was a bit of a funny one. So we went to America in July to go see my husband's family, and so that my in-laws could finally meet Jonathan, because they haven't had a chance to come to Australia. Now, I made a set of beanies called the Homecoming Honeycombs beanies last time we went to America. It's one of my more popular patterns, actually, so if you want to check it out, I'll pop a link down below. And it's this gorgeous sort of rainbow gradient-y beanie that's made in the same honeycomb pattern as the baby blanket that I knit earlier. And the funny thing is that I made one for my nephew the last time we went to the States, and then I later on made a matching one for his mum so that they could have matching beanies. And it took me so long to give her her beanie, because I dragged my feet on actually mailing it, that he outgrew his original beanie, so I had to make him another one so that he would actually match with her. But funnily enough, I still had this yarn left over from when I made his original one. So this is made from Morris & Sons Quartet, which is a 8-ply bamboo wool blend, I'm pretty sure. And last time I was in Morris & Sons, I couldn't see it, so I'm worried that they may have discontinued it. But it was this gorgeous yarn. The bamboo made it really soft and the wool made it really stretchy. And it was in this like blue gradient sort of colour. And the grey is Knit Pick Swish DK. And so I made him another beanie, and hopefully he'll be able to wear it in the winter that's coming up in the States and actually match his mum. Okay, the next project I have is another success in the whole stash busting endeavour. This is a t-shirt for my daughter. So I was very much inspired by Nitty Natty, who is a podcaster from America who I've been watching for a while, and she was making a shirt called the Color Tip Tee. I unfortunately don't know who the designer of that is, but if I can find the details, I'll put them up here on the screen. And that is a design that is knit for adults, and I wanted to make one for my daughter, so I just made up a design. I have been really loving going back to my roots and just winging projects. I think part of what I lost, or part of the reason why I lost my knitting mojo, was that I have been knitting for work for the last 3 or 4 years. It's been my full-time job. And so this sort of grind of coming up with patterns and only making things up if I know I'm going to publish them, and taking copious notes and doing all the grading and all the pattern writing, it's just sort of, I think I've lost some of my passion for why I started doing this. And so I haven't picked that up again since my son was born. And so I've just been winging projects and making things up and not caring about whether I can turn this into 10 different sizes, or, you know, especially because like this is based on someone else's pattern, so there's no way that I would publish it myself. So it's been really fun just making things up as I go. And I based the measurements off of a shirt that she already has, and it's slightly too big for her, which is great because it means it'll still fit her through this summer. And I just let her loose in my stash. We had a lot of fun looking through all of my tiny little fingering weight balls, which I have a lot of, and she finally settled on this purple, which is called Ordine Wool's Interlock, which is unfortunately a discontinued yarn now, but it's made out of a really interesting mix of very different fibers, which I'll pop up here on the screen. And the colors ended up being a set that was gifted to me a very long time ago by Mel from Three Cats Yarn. And so this was one of the very first things that she dyed. And this is deep, deep stash. This was gifted to me in 2020 or 2021. And I finally found a use for them because I had been saving them up for something special, and Amelia wanted them, so I let her have them. So these are the colours that ended up on the edges in the ribbing. And she did a really cute sketch for me, so I drew her a shirt and she coloured in what she wanted. And this is what we came up with. So I'm really happy with this. My one regret is that she put it on and declared it was itchy. So this yarn was actually a yarn that I initially used to design a bag. And it was great as a bag yarn because it's quite sturdy, but it's a little more on the rustic side, especially because I think it's got some linen in it or some flax or something like that. So when she first tried it on, I hadn't blocked it yet. So I have blocked it now, and hopefully that'll have softened it up a little bit, and we'll see how she goes in the summer. If not, it can just be a sort of autumny t-shirt, and we can pop a singlet or something underneath, and hopefully that'll make it a bit more wearable. But yes, this is my super cute colour tip tee. Okay, we're in the home stretch now, and the next project I have for you is what I'm wearing, and this is going to be really hard to show you on the camera, so I will take some footage and pop it on the screen. This is a jumper called Neighborhood, and it's by Erica Knight. It is from a gorgeous book called Texture, and I borrowed it from the library. So one of the really fun things about Amelia starting school is that there's a public library basically next to her school, and we've started going to the library after school pretty often when I pick her up. And it's just been really fun going to libraries. Because I feel like it's something you do when you're a kid and you sort of lose the habit of doing it as an adult. And it's just a really good resource for knitting books, actually. So we've signed up to a couple of different libraries in our area, and they all have different books. Obviously. Sorry, that sounds like a really obvious statement. But it's not just they have different books. I feel like they have different styles of knitting book. So there's one library close to us that has a lot of really cool stitch dictionaries. And then the one that's near Amelia's school has a lot of really pretty pattern books. So they have all the really popular pom-pom books, the 52 weeks of whatever, scarves and shawls and easy projects. And then they also had this gorgeous book called Texture, which I sort of want to buy a copy and just chuck it on my coffee table because it's so pretty. But I was looking through the patterns, and this is really the only thing that I would realistically make out of it. So I don't know if it's the best investment to buy. But the pattern's called Neighborhood. The jumper was designed for an Aran weight wool, which in Australia is about a 12 ply. But I've made this out of Bendigo Wool & Mill's 10 ply cotton. And the colour's called Parchment. And I had bought this yarn years and years and years ago because I knew that I wanted a cozy cotton jumper. There's something about cotton jumpers that I really love. They're just so soft and cozy feeling. And so I knew, looking at the pattern, that it wouldn't suffer much for being knit out of cotton. The only thing that's really been a problem is that the ribbing is very, very stretched, which I knew would happen anyway because that always happens with cotton. The ribbing doesn't stretch much. So I compensated by making the cuff way, way smaller than it was written for in the pattern. And it does also mean that the neckline has stretched out quite a bit, which is making the sleeves really long. So that's why they're all the way down here. So I do actually think I'm going to redo the ribbing. But if I do that, I'll go into the details of it next time I make a podcast episode because I don't want to dive too deep in this video. But other than the neckline stretching out, I'm so happy with this jumper. It is so cozy and I love it. And I've been wearing it heaps since I cast off. So I finished this about a week ago. 2 weeks ago, according to my RAVELRY project. And I've worn it so many times since then. I've been living half of my time in this jumper because I love it so much. So, great success. I'm glad I finally used up my stash of cotton yarn that I've been intending to make a jumper out of for years and years and years. And the very last project is a pair of socks that I cast off last night. And I'm so proud of myself. I finally made a pair of socks that fit. So, this is a bit of an amalgamation of patterns because I could not find a pattern that just worked for me. And part of the reason why is because I've discovered or rediscovered that I have a very skinny, very long foot, which is why these socks look so weird. It's also because they're ribbing, so they stretch out a lot more when I wear them, and I'll pop up some pictures of me actually wearing them on the screen so you can see. So my idea with these was that I was going to take everything that I had learned from the original pair of socks, which I can't find because they're on my feet, and use the same yarn and needle size, but just make some adjustments in an effort to try and actually get a pair that fit for once. So I tried making the circumference quite a bit smaller and the foot a little bit longer, and it turned out that because I had made the circumference smaller, I had to actually make the foot way, way longer. And then I discovered that I really don't like the heel. So the pattern that I found, which once again was the toe-up sock with a fleagle heel, I just used it because I wanted a simple toe-up ribbed sock, and that was the first thing that showed up on RAVELRY. And it turns out that I really don't like the fleagle heel. So I ended up using a pretty standard short row heel, but I thought that it would be very straightforward just finding like a short row heel on the internet, and it turns out that it's actually not as easy as I thought it would be. But I ended up mostly using a tutorial from Nimble Needles, so I'll put that down in the link below as well. And for my sock knitting nerds, because I know you're out there, I ended up doing the toe from the fleagle heel pattern, and then I worked 80 rounds in the foot, and then I did the heel, and then I just knit the cuff until I ran out of yarn. Now, I had thought that I had split the remainder of my ball of yarn pretty evenly in two, but it turns out that I hadn't, so this sock ended up ending up here, and this one ended up down here. And I'd already done I'd already done the heel in a contrast yarn, which is West Yorkshire Spinners Bo Peep 4-ply, which again is something that I had in my stash. So I just used that for the cuff, and I have very uneven amounts of it in the cuff between the two socks, but I don't care because they're socks and they fit and I like them and I'm going to wear them all the time. Whew. Okay. That was a lot, and that's it. And I literally have no whips on my needles except for one giant Oh my gosh, I haven't even talked about the blanket. We will talk about that another time because I will probably make a whole separate video. But I do also have a scrappy blanket on my needles, and we'll talk about that later. But that's a whole other stash busting thing that I'm doing that, stay tuned. I will tell you all about it at some point. But aside from my big scrappy blanket, which is a long-term project anyway, I actually have nothing on my needles right now because I decided that I would film right after I finish the socks. So we will see what I come up with next. But I am pretty proud of myself for all of this stash busting, and I do have a lot of things that I've learned. So I'm going to film a video immediately after this to go over all of the things that I've learned from this giant stash down and some tips and tricks that you can use if you want to do your own stash down. And so I will get to that, and hopefully I will see you back for that video. I also realized it's been a very long video and I didn't actually give you as much life updating as I thought I was going to in the process. So just to let you know, things are good. Life is good, and we've settled into a bit more of a routine as much as you can with a 5-year-old and a baby. He's almost 1, which is freaking me out. I don't know how that happened. It's really strange. I feel like with my first kid, time could not go any slower, and with the second one, it's gone so quickly. So I have been enjoying his babyhood a lot more than I did the first time around, and yeah, we've just been having a good time. We've taken him traveling a bit. Well, obviously both of them. We've taken them both traveling a bit. So we went to the States, we went to Adelaide last weekend, and he's doing really well health-wise, and she's doing really well at school, and I am deciding what to do post-maternity leave. I am going to keep doing Oliphant Cat, which was actually up in the air for a little while. But I've decided I am. What that looks like is just going to shift a little bit. So I think I'm going to emphasize tech editing a lot more and not design quite as much as I had been previously. Because like I said, I've just sort of burnt out a little bit on the designing, and I've lost some of the fun of it. So I think I'm going to go back to having design more as like a hobby. If I do want to release a pattern here and there, I will. But it's not going to be a focus. So the main focus I am going to be doing is tech editing. So if you're a designer or a budding designer and you're interested in working with me as a tech editing client, or if you just want to know why you would need a tech editor, please leave me a comment, send me an email, or slide into my DMs on Instagram, because I'd love to chat to you about it. Other than that, yeah, life's just going ahead. Things are going pretty well, and I'm excited about it being sunnier and going into spring and summer because this is my favorite time of year. And yeah, we're doing really well. So thank you so much for sticking around if you are a returning viewer. And I am glad to be back on YouTube. I have so many ideas about videos that I want to make, if you haven't been able to tell. And so I'll try and get to those. So if you would like to keep up to date with the videos when they come out, you can hit the subscribe button up here, or you can hit the bell button down in the bottom to get notified about when new videos come out. And if you'd like to catch up on any of the previous podcast episodes while you wait, then there's a playlist of them all right here. But other than that, I've been Kat from Oliphant Cat, and it's lovely to be back. It's nice to see you, and happy knitting until next time.